Our readings today come from the book of Genesis, and we'll also talk a little bit about Matthew as well. Reading from Genesis chapter 37. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him up out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. In the last few weeks, we've been working through the Gospel of Matthew, several different descriptions of the kingdom of heaven. In this week's passage in Matthew, which I didn't read, but I will talk a little bit about, we have Jesus walking on the water in the middle of the night, walking towards his disciples. A very physical demonstration that not only is the kingdom Jesus is teaching about different, but that he himself is different. On some of my trips to Israel, I heard about people who were planning to take advantage of all the tourists that would come, and they talked about setting up some kind of floating platform that would float just under the water's surface and be sort of camouflaged so the tourists could walk out on it and look like they were walking on water and get their pictures taken. I guess, we know our own tourist traps here in Buffalo and Niagara Falls. I guess tourists can get taken in wherever you go. With all those surprising moments of the kingdom of heaven is like, I had my own last week. I went into my office at the college after not being in there for a while, and even though I rescued some of my plants when we first shut down things, I had to leave some of the plants there and tried to leave them with a little bit of water, but they got neglected. And I went into my office to discover that one of the very neglected plants not only survived, but had put out a flower. The kingdom of heaven is like flowers that appear where we do not expect them. In the Genesis readings in the past weeks, we've been following the story of Jacob. Someone who is not necessarily the best example of how to live one's life. Most of you have heard the story of Joseph. There was even that little musical a while back. And you've heard this story of Joseph being sold by his brothers. And you know how the story ends. Once he ends up in Egypt, he's able to help Pharaoh. He becomes powerful. And when the time comes that his family needs him, he helps his family and ultimately is reconciled with his brothers. But that's not where our story ends today. Our story ends with this conflict unresolved. I can understand the desire to try to finish it, to resolve that story, to move past the pain. We don't like leaving things unresolved any more than we like cliffhangers at the end of TV shows. I think for some people that's one of the nice things about Netflix is that you have the whole series available. You don't have to wait for months and months finding out if your favorite character survived. But this is a pretty serious cliffhanger. Joseph has been betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery in Egypt, and it seems like those dreams he had, perhaps awkward dreams that we'll talk about in a moment, may never come true. But we need to back up. We're talking about Jacob's family. Jacob was a man who tricked his own brother and father at his mother's instigation. He lied to his father, pretended to be his brother, got his father to bless him, even disguised himself, put furs on his arms so that his brother would think, or his father would think it was Esau's hairy arms that he was feeling. He betrayed his own family members. And then he ran away and visited his uncle, worked for his uncle in return for marrying his uncle's daughter, except he himself got tricked. The night of the wedding, he thought he was marrying Rachel, the younger daughter that he loved, and he woke up the next morning to realize that he had married Leah. Now, imagine, the story is often told about Jacob's disappointment, but imagine for a second how problematic and uncomfortable this must have been for Leah. Knowing that she was not the one Jacob wanted, knowing that she had no choice in all of this because her father orchestrated the whole thing, and knowing that then Jacob said, well, okay, I'll work extra and marry Rachel as well. Leah was definitely not happy. And as the story goes on, Jacob is now married to two wives who are not getting along. Each of those wives also has a servant, and this is one of the prime examples that I point out to my students, that just because something happens in the Bible, it's not a good example of how we should live our lives today, since thankfully marriages like that are not permitted anymore. But all of those wives and maidservants sort of competed for Jacob's attention, and their sons then picked up those rivalries. Leah and the servant girls had babies, and many years later, as the story in Genesis says, Joseph was born in Jacob's old age. Finally, Rachel, that wife he wanted to marry, had a son. So Joseph was very important to Jacob. And later she did have another son, Benjamin, and died in childbirth. So Benjamin also had a very special place in Jacob's heart. put all these family dynamics together, it's even crazier than some things that show up on Jerry Springer. But all those brothers knew that Joseph was the favorite. And that Jacob treated him special. We've often heard of it as the coat of many colors. Some translators say that it was a coat with sleeves. Whatever it was something special, something different. And we didn't read this part of the text, but Joseph has these dreams. And imagine how popular he's going to be with his brothers when he comes and says, "Hey guys, guess what? I had these dreams that you all bowed down to me. Isn't that great?" Yeah, that's going to go over well. You remember the show a while back, Everybody Loves Raymond? Well, here it's, well, we know Jacob loves Joseph. So even though they were family, his brothers clearly did not have his back. Of course, it also seems that Joseph was not always the loving brother he could have been, because he was reporting back to his father, "Well, you know what my brothers were doing." So when he goes to check on them as they're taking care of the herds, they see him coming and they think, okay, this is our chance. Now his one brother, Reuben, if I remember correctly, Reuben is the oldest, tries to pull it back a little bit and says, okay, well, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. It says that Reuben was planning to come back and fix it later. Unfortunately, as happens in life sometimes, those things that we put on the list to take care of later don't always work out, because then the brothers say, well, hey, look, here's a caravan. We'll get rid of our brother, and hey, we'll get some extra spending money in the process. And so this family trauma has just intensified. Joseph and his brothers didn't get along. They take it to the next level by tying him up. And now they've sold him into slavery. And they're telling their father, oh, a wild animal must have gotten him. And as I said, we know how the story ends. And in our minds, we may want to be trying to resolve it. But that's not where our reading today gets us. It gets us in the middle of it, with everything unresolved, with everything messy, with trauma and suffering that look like it could go on for quite a while. It's a good thing that never happens in real life, right? So last week I asked you to pray for my friend Trevor and his family. He passed away at age 94. And at the service, which we kept small attendance in person but had a video going on so that people could watch it later, it was one of those services, and maybe you've experienced some, where people were grieving, but there was certainly quite a lot of laughter, quite a lot of good memories. And I learned some new things about Trevor, about how to take care of the smell when a skunk falls into your swimming pool and dies. All I'll say is that at age 75, he apparently went to Walmart to purchase a case of something from the feminine hygiene aisle. But it worked. He was born in Australia. He became a street preacher. He studied in England and was serving a church in Scotland. When in 1965 he was invited to come to Amherst United Church of Christ as their theologian in residence. And he stayed. He taught at the college for over 40 years, working as a professor, a pastoral counselor. And even in his 80s, he was still teaching and driving, although all his family members and all of us that knew him knew that riding with him in the car was certainly an adventure. And even in his 90s, he was still reading and trying to learn new things. And one of the classes that he taught frequently and that was always very popular was on religion and dreams, a very timely topic. People did share about difficult moments. His first marriage ended very badly. He found love in a second marriage, but she died of cancer. But as one of his sons said, what the world saw was what he really was. Someone who would stop and listen, or would call and ask, "Do you have a minute?" And of course that minute lasted much longer, but he really did want to talk. I want to be like Trevor when I grow up. As this year has shown, none of us know what will happen. None of us can predict how things will go, and there can certainly be rough turns. There can certainly be moments when the dreams that we have, the things that we think God is calling us to do not seem possible anymore. Just as in the Joseph story, we may think that our dreams are gone. But we'll be continuing with this story of Joseph, and we'll see that Joseph did not give up. Like Joseph, we can hold on to God's promises. Like Joseph, we can hold on to those dreams. Dreams that may end up bearing fruit in completely different ways. But like Joseph, we can trust God. And like Peter, who, when Jesus called him out of the boat, out onto the water, we too can try to follow, even if we don't know how it will work. May you hold on to your dreams. May you hold on to your faith and hope in God. Amen. I will share the benediction and then some closing music. You have been raised with Christ. Do the work of Christ in the world. Extend a hand to those in need. Speak up for those others who others would cast aside. Build bridges of reconciliation. Strengthen the bonds of community and extend the invitation of life. Build community and purpose to others, knowing that the God who created you, the Christ who redeems you, and the Spirit who empowers you will be with you this day and evermore. Amen.